Donald Trump is doing a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. Immigration, the most important. He's doing a lot of things that symbolically scratch itches for conservatives. In fact, if you look through his executive orders, they're so creative. Taking on the universities itself was something that people said, oh, you can't do that. Look at him go to war against Harvard of all. Like, he started with the toughest. You know, the fact that he's resolved 6 international conflicts is sort of a bonus that I don't even think people were thinking about. And that's not the most important thing for an American president to do, but it is sort of awesome. And if I were an American pundit, I would be saying amen every day. I'm a Canadian pundit, so instead I'm railing against Mark Carney, mass immigration. You know, every problem in Canada under Trudeau is the same or worse. If I was a Brit, I would be in panic by the 1,000 illegal migrants at a time coming over from France in dinghies and the rape gangs that are in the... So there's so much to talk about and to fight about in Canada, including the fact that the Conservatives didn't win an election. In the UK, there's so much to talk about and fight about. But in America, you know, if you're a right-winger, if you're a critic of Soros, if you're a critic of the World Economic Forum, holy smokes, your dreams are coming true and you're being entertained by Donald Trump, who is an inherent entertainer. So Will Chamberlain made a tweet the other day, and I had him on to talk about it. He said, one of the reasons you see sort of a craziness amongst some pundits on the right is that Trump has taken away their fodder. And he was referring to Candace Owens and I think a little bit to Tucker Carlson. And I know there was a certain part of the right-wing commentariat who it felt like they were lusting for Trump's attack on Iran to go awry. They were actually sort of hoping, it felt like, for Iran to launch a major war against America instead of just staying completely silent while Trump used the B-2 bombers on them. And I had Will on to talk about it, and I saw that you made a comment that maybe Will himself, in fact, Will said that you've called him woke, right? And I didn't understand. That's when I thought we got to have James on to figure this out.
First, I'll talk about James Lindsay first. So James Lindsay is woke right. Nomenclature, I think, is totally useless. He'd characterize me as woke right. He'd characterize my organization as woke right. It's an umbrella term that he's using as a classical liberal to essentially indict anybody to the right of him. It's really obnoxious and not enlightening in any way. Like, if I'm woke right and Tucker Carlson is woke right, then what even is the term describing?
Do me a favor, answer 2 parts to the question. The first is there something going on with pundits, including my former hero, Tucker Carlson, who I looked up to for so many years as a role model? I think he's gone way over the edge. I think I just don't understand what's going on there. And Candace Owens, I think she's anti-Semitic. And I don't want to throw that term around lightly. Like, the stuff she says about Jews being demonic, it doesn't even feel like political commentary anymore. My first question is, what the heck is going on with them and a dozen copycats to them? And then I'll ask you to figure out this Will Chamberlain thing. But first of all, help me diagnose what's going on with Tucker and Candace.
Well, I mean, not to drag Will into it prematurely, but I have a more cynical interpretation of what's happening than he does. I perceive that there is a radical splinter movement that has been embedded within MAGA, probably all along, actually. We used to call it the alt-right. Then there was the so-called very fine people hoax around the Charlottesville event in August of 2017. Is that right? The date? Yes. And they went underground, but they didn't go away. What they did was they put on happy faces and they joined the movement and became more and more prominent within a broad pro-America MAGA thing that grew, and it rapidly strengthened under the Biden years. And then I feel like last summer they started to emerge from their cocoon and to try to run a radical splinter movement. And I think Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and most of these other, sometimes Trump calls them panicans, are all part of this. And you'll notice the pattern. What they did in the advance, say, of the Iran strike was that they came out saying this is going to cause World War III. Trump is terrible. This is it. They turned on Trump quite vocally. And then when it worked, they turned around and claimed that they were the ones who made it work. that in fact Trump is great, but it's also that he's great that he listened to them and their wise counsel as influencers and pundits. And I think this is all a game. I have an extraordinarily cynical interpretation of this. I think it is a deliberate strategy to undermine MAGA from within, because they could not, and I don't mean these same people, whether it's World Economic Forum, George Soros, Democrats, if there's the deep state, if it's foreign adversaries like Russia, China, Qatar, Iran, etc. They could not undermine MAGA from without for the last 2016 to 2024. They could not take it down from the outside. They had to end up taking it down from the inside. And what better issue to do than Israel and Jews, to split people, to scare off Jews and people who care about them, people who are recent nose-holding voters for Republicans for the first time, who could have been converted into lifelong conservatives away from this communist lurch the Democrats have taken. And now they're terrified that what's going on here? Are these people Nazis? Are some of them Nazis? Are they at least working with or sympathetic to Nazi ideas? Why are they laundering Hitler? Why are they saying Churchill was the bad guy of World War II and that maybe Hitler was the good guy, as Tucker Carlson's guest said the other day? People are freaking out about this. And my interpretation of it is there is a splinter cell that is operating as though it's the other hand of the other side that's aiming to take down MAGA from within. And I don't know why, and cannot start to guess why certain influencers and pundits like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and so on are participating in this. But I think with at least a certain list of them, it is beyond question. I mean, there's a short list of reasons why people do this. They have some kind of resentment that they're trying to enact. We know that Tucker Carlson is a paleo conservative who is not particularly happy that MAGA took the thrust of radical energy in the mid-2010s. So maybe he has a political motive that he wanted a more radical, older conservative model to resurge, and it didn't, so he's got to take down MAGA. Maybe there's personal animus under the surface between him and Trump that he keeps hidden. Maybe it's the more, ugly and prosaic nature of these things, money, blackmail, or whatever. And then there's also the possibility with influencers of audience capture. We know there's a foreign bot problem. I know you talked to Will about that as well. A foreign bot problem on Twitter that's amplifying some of these worst possible ideas. A lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of the so-called Nazi content on Twitter is heavily pushed by the Russians. This is a game that they are playing. It is traceable to Russian cells that are trying to amplify the likes, amplify the retweets, fill the comments with negativity when it goes the wrong way, to slowly lead these poor influencers who are obsessed in many cases with their statistics. What are my numbers showing? Am I growing? Am I getting a bigger audience? Am I getting more likes? Am I getting more retweets? Am I getting more shares on my video? They're obsessed with these metrics. You can screw that person's head up so easily without giving them a dime inorganically. Like, they make money off of their X getting more engagement. They make money off their YouTube getting more engagement. But you don't have to show up with a checkbook and, snarling, face and say, say this stuff and we'll give you $10 million, like in the Tenet Media scandal. You don't have to do any of that. You can actually fry these people's brains just by playing in the dopamine circuit of their social media experience if they're not aware that that's happening. And we know that that kind of thing is happening. It's very clear, the bot activity, if you hit certain keywords or whatever. So why these influencers and pundits and so on are participating, I think, is multifaceted. I think there are many reasons that apply in different amounts to different people. It's also their own business that has not been broken in many stories. So we don't know. It's actually ambiguous to us. And so the best we can do is speculate and guess, which we always have to do, with, circumspection and caution. We can't be accusing people of, oh, Tucker's doing this because he's blackmailed. That we don't have proof of that. If we did, it would be a different story, so we don't know why they're doing it, but I'm utterly convinced by the level of coordination, the strategic rollout, the kind of timing, the ability. I have an ability to predict some of the things that they do, like their new push. They said, they started saying, what is an American is going to be the most important question. What is an American? What is an American? Then boom, the next week they roll out Heritage American as the answer to this question that they've ginned up out of the immigration argument. So I think it's coordinated. I don't think that this was an unplanned organic evolution. And so I think that this is a radical splinter movement that is significantly coordinated, that stretches back not a year, but 10 years, and that we're well behind the playbook of what they're running, that it's extremely well funded, that there is a lot of money and there's a lot of foreign support. My interpretation of what's happening there is extremely cynical, unfortunately. I don't think it's organic at all.
You know, I think what you've just said there is the most persuasive explanation I've heard. You know, Rebel News, we like being quite conservative. In some ways, we're quite radical. You know, we're Canadian, though. We're very interested in the U.S., but at least 4 of our alumni have gone crazy in that direction. And I think it's worth noting that all 4 of them were single women. And I remember talking with them as I could feel things vibrating. And when you say dopamine, there's something about social media and how it interacts with, I think, the female mind slightly different than the male mind. I mean, women, I think, are more social than men. They, you know, the validation, you know, young women on Twitter, the more radical they get, the more loving notes they get from men, including, I know this sounds ridiculous, but everyday marriage proposals. Now, these young female influencers know that they're not going to marry this guy, but maybe it's a dream. Well, maybe I'll find someone out there who's sort of but it's a good feeling. It's a lot of likes. I remember talking to one young woman, I won't say who would get hundreds of thousands of views on her videos, and she really thought that the alt-right was the core of her audience. I said, no, they're not real. And I think. And the thing is, and we had one person on our team, maybe it's giving it away, she came from a reality show background. And there you've got every episode has to be more dramatic than the last one. What's your move this episode? Okay, how do you trump that? So social media magnifies a lot of these things. And there's one more thing that I didn't contemplate until I think it might have been Will who said it. The payment doesn't have to be from the official ambassador from Qatar. It can be, just like there are bots, you know, giving you likes and views. If you have some sort of a super chat function or a tip or donation function, you can be getting lots of $50 and $100 gifts from people with inscrutable online names. And so you don't even have to know that you're being funded by Qatar. I mean, there are some cases, I found it very odd that Qatar registered, that someone registered as under the Foreign Agent Registration Act to spend $200,000 to lobby to get the, I think it was the Iranian, or to get the Qatari PM on Tucker's show. I mean, it's normally not that brazen, but I think a lot of it is just what you said. It's psychological, it's feeling of momentum, it's sort of safe in numbers. And if Candace and Tucker can do it, and they're such big battleships, then everyone in a canoe says, oh, I'll follow along in their wake. I think it's a lot of that. I just don't get it with Tucker, because surely money's not important to him. Surely he's got enough. Maybe it's a sort of vengeance against the Murdochs, who I think were considered Zionists or something. I don't know. It makes me sad, because I don't think anti-Semitism, I think in a way, by definition, it's a kind of wokeness, because you're judging all Jews as the oppressors, and it's this sort of mystic, cosmic enemy. It's a real leftist thing to say, oh, I have a problem in my life. It's got to be the Jews. It would be like going through a Rorschach inkblot test. The Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Like it's become an obsession for a lot of these pundits and even some comedians. They just won't stop talking about the Jews in Gaza. And I'm not saying don't talk about it, but that is not the core issue for Republicans or Americans or Trump supporters. Okay, I'm done my rant.
That was a beautiful rant. But yeah, I mean, this does interface. The thing is like you said, with some of your former, you know, alumna, that they've gone crazy, right? Well, what kind of crazy have they gone? And this is where that woke right label came in my opinion. They've gone woke. How did they go woke? They saw all the left woke and they absorbed its assumptions. They absorbed its tactics, and they said those worked for the left. The assumptions are probably true because their, you know, political warfare worked for them. Therefore, there must be something to it. Let's take that on. Maybe identity politics is the right way to believe it. Maybe there is actually a consortium of people, and maybe it is run by some kind of shadowy identity group. Of course, there are differences between the way the left and right observe these things, but the fact is that they have absorbed these assumptions, like there is no possibility of objectivity or neutrality, and maybe those things aren't actually desirable at all. Maybe all knowledge is actually local. So rather than, having indigenous peoples who have their special knowledges that are being disfavored by the alleged capitalist system, now we have heritage nationalists, heritage Americans, heritage Canadians, heritage English, whatever, whose ways of knowing are ultimately located in their people group. And those are being, disfavored by this, whatever we want to call it, global American empire or whatever other names, neocon regime, post-war liberal consensus, whatever names that they give at different times in different places, that's keeping them, and I'm trying to stay out of the impolite names that they give this stuff, but this system, is keeping the true indigenous of, say, the United States, which would be the heritage Americans who founded the country rather than the Native Americans. And it's keeping not just that, but their ways of living, being, and knowing out of the discussion because they're deemed things like racist and xenophobic and so on. But my definition for woke right has always just been that it's people on the right who've adopted critical consciousness to advance their idealistic vision of society, and it's absorbing the left, the energy of the left, same energy, opposite direction is what I was trying to get to. They absorb the energy of the left, the woke energy, and say, well, they must be onto something because they've been so effective at getting power, and it's caused us to be alienated from our experience in life. And so we have to transcend our alienation through collective identity and throw it back at them. That's my whole idea of woke right. And this also explains, unfortunately, and I don't think he's very woke right. It's a scale, just like your niece who comes home from school and says some goofy stuff about trans isn't necessarily, a hardened communist out in the street with her fist up. You can be a little woke. Well, at the same time, you can be a little woke right. And this is why I think, that the term woke right applies to Will Chamberlain, although barely. Lightly, is because he's adopted this idea. He's a important member of the National Conservative Movement, which is if you actually read Yoram Hazony's book, Yoram Hazony's the director of the National Conservative Movement. Yoram Hazony wrote a book called The Virtue of Nationalism in 2018. And if you read it, he actually says that epistemologically, and I know it's a fancy word, but your understanding of the world is located in your people group, which is a nation, and that there should be the ability for nations to be sovereign, but not just in terms of deciding their own affairs, where he kind of gives what amounts to a libertarian position among nations instead of individuals, where each nation can't interfere with the others, and he doesn't have great solutions for how an aggressor nation is going to be dealt with by smaller nations. But also that he has this underlying idea that truth is located in your people, which is a kind of postmodern traditionalism as an answer to postmodern egalitarianism on the other side. So it's the same energy, opposite direction. And so I don't think Will Chamberlain is very woke. I don't think he's not anti-Semitic at all, as far as I can tell. It's a big mistake people make to think, well, all these Jew haters, that's the woke right. Well, yeah, they are, but it's a broader term than that. And it's not a sloppy term or an imprecise term. It's having adopted certain epistemological and metaphysical commitments, and then having adopted also those views to give permission structures to use tactics that are, in parallel or the reverse operation of what the woke left has been doing to us, like, canceling people, as in yours truly.